Silas, a man whose hands knew the rough feel of rope and the cold weight of a rifle, found his prize mare, Star, near the creek bed. She lay still, too still, a dark stain spreading on the dusty earth beneath her. An Apache arrow, fletched with feathers he didn't recognize, stuck out from her side. His gut clenched. This meant trouble, the kind that usually ended in blood and tears on the frontier. He'd seen it before, but as he knelt, a shadow fell over him. He looked up, expecting to see a warrior, a scout, a threat he understood. Instead, a young Apache girl, no older than 10, stood silently over the mare's body. In her hand, she held a small knife, its blade stained with fresh blood. Her eyes, dark and steady, met his. There was no fear in them, no apology, just a calm defiance that made his own blood run cold. Silas had faced grizzlies and outlaws, but this quiet, unwavering stare from a child was something new. He pushed himself up, trying to keep his voice level, not wanting to scare her, but also not wanting to show any weakness. Years on this land had taught him that weakness was a luxury no one could afford. "Why?" he asked, his voice rougher than he intended. "Why did you kill my horse?" The girl, small and slight, didn't flinch. Her name, he would soon learn, was Luna. She looked from him to the dead mare, then back to him. Her English was broken, pieced together, but clear enough to understand. She walked on our place. Sacred ground. My people sleep there. She gestured vaguely towards the rise of hills that bordered his ranch, hills he considered just more land for grazing. Silas felt a hot surge of anger. Sacred ground or not, this was his best mare, a horse he'd raised from a foal, a horse that had carried him through rough winters and long cattle drives. But beneath the anger, a different feeling started to brew, a cold knot in his stomach. He looked at Luna again, at her fierce, protective eyes. There was no malice there, no joy in what she'd done, only a deep, unshakable conviction. She wasn't just a child, she was a guardian. He'd built his ranch too close to Apache lands. Everyone in the territory knew it. But it was always something easy to dismiss, a distant rumor, a problem for someone else. He'd put up his fences, claimed his acreage, and believed he was within his rights. Now, the line had been crossed, literally, and the cost was his best horse. The reality of it hit him hard. He'd pushed too far, ignored warnings, and now he was paying. Luna continued to watch him, her small knife still clutched in her hand. The silence stretched between them, thick with the weight of unspoken history, of two worlds colliding. Silas felt a strange mix of rage and a chilling understanding. This wasn't just about a horse. It was about land, about respect, about lines drawn by nature and tradition long before any white man arrived with deeds and wire. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he couldn't just ride away from this. He couldn't bury Star and pretend this moment never happened. This girl, this land, this dead mare, they demanded more. He had to understand. Before we proceed, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are listening from. Silas, instead of giving in to the immediate urge for retaliation, made a decision that surprised even himself. He decided to seek out the Apache elders. It was a dangerous move, one few white men would dare to make unarmed. But the fierce conviction in Luna's eyes, coupled with the unsettling understanding that had settled in his gut, left him with little choice. He couldn't just brush this off. He rode towards the Apache camp, a place that was more legend than reality to most settlers, a place whispered about with fear and suspicion. The closer he got, the more his resolve was tested by the stories he'd heard, the warnings from other ranchers. But the image of Star, lying dead with an arrow in her side, and Luna's unwavering gaze, kept him going. When he arrived, he was met with a wall of suspicious faces. Warriors, women, and children watched his approach with silent, narrowed eyes. He dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible, a clear sign he meant no harm. Before he could even speak, Luna stepped forward from the crowd. She looked small, but her presence was commanding. To Silas's surprise, she began to speak in her native tongue, gesturing towards him, then towards the hills. recounting the incident with the mare. The elders, recognizable by their age and the respect shown to them by the others, listened intently. After Luna finished, there was a long silence, broken only by the rustling of the wind through the sparse brush. Then one of the elders, a man with deep lines etched into his face, began to speak, his voice low and guttural. Another man, younger, translated for Silas, his English surprisingly good. They spoke of the land, not as property to be bought and sold, but as a living entity, a sacred trust passed down through generations. They explained the ancient markers, the burial grounds, the places where their ancestors rested. Silas listened, a slow dawning of understanding replacing his initial anger. His fences, his claims, had been an insult, an act of disrespect on a scale he hadn't comprehended. He had seen only dirt and grass. They saw history, family, and spirit. The elder then offered a solution, a peace offering that caught Silas off guard. They would give him a young, wild Mustang, a horse of incredible spirit and strength, a gift of immense value. But there was a condition. Silas had to agree to move his fence line back, respecting the true boundary of their sacred lands. Silas initially felt a familiar prickle of resistance. This was his land, his ranch. To give up even an inch felt like a defeat. But as he looked at the stern, unyielding faces of the elders, and then at Luna, who stood beside them, he realized the alternative. The alternative was war, a conflict he knew he could not win, not really. It would cost more than just animals. It would cost lives, his own included eventually, and bring endless strife. He saw the wisdom in their words, the deep understanding they had of cause and effect. Some lines, once respected, could prevent deeper bloodshed, could prevent an endless cycle of revenge and pain. He nodded, a silent agreement passing between them. He would move his fence. He would honor their boundary. He would accept the Mustang. Silas returned to his ranch, the wild Mustang now his. The horse, a magnificent creature with eyes that held the untamed spirit of the plains, was a constant reminder of the agreement he had made. His ranch hands, a gruff and unyielding bunch, were confused by his decision to redraw the boundaries. They saw it as weakness, a concession to people they considered beneath them, a surrender of valuable grazing land. Whispers followed him as he rode, words like coward and fool, barely muffled by the wind. But Silas, looking at the distant mountains now framed by a new imaginary line, knew it was strength. He understood that true power wasn't in taking, but in knowing when to give, when to respect. He worked tirelessly in the following weeks, moving posts, pulling up old wire, and stringing new fences. The sun beat down on his back. The dust caked his skin, but he pushed through, driven by a new purpose. Each new post hammered into the earth, each length of wire stretched taut, was a physical manifestation of his commitment, a silent promise to the Apache people. He marked the new, agreed-upon line with precision, ensuring not an inch of the sacred land was encroached upon. It was hard, grueling work, and his hands were raw and blistered, but he felt a strange sense of peace with each completed section. Luna would occasionally appear on a ridge overlooking his ranch, a small figure silhouetted against the vast sky. She never approached, never spoke, but her presence was a silent acknowledgement, a constant reminder that he was being watched, that his promise was being observed. She was a silent guardian, a living monument to the fragile peace they had forged. Her unwavering gaze, even from a distance, held a quiet power, a sense of accountability that kept Silas honest. Sometimes he would wave, and though she never waved back, he imagined a slight nod, a subtle shift in her posture that conveyed acceptance. One blustery afternoon, as Silas was finishing the last section of the new fence, a familiar sound broke the quiet of the plains. Hoofbeats, heavy and numerous, approached from the west. It was Jed, a rival rancher whose land bordered Silas's to the west. Jed was a man built of bluster and greed, with a cruel streak that made him unpopular even among his own men. He rode at the head of a small procession of cowboys, his face a sneer as he took in Silas's new, shorter fence line. "Well, well, Silas," Jed boomed, his voice carrying on the wind. Looks like you've gone soft, giving up good land to those redskins. What a coward. His men chuckled, their eyes mocking. Jed dismounted, his boots kicking up dust as he approached the newly strung wire. He pulled out a pair of wire cutters, the metallic glint catching the harsh sunlight. Silas watched, his jaw tight. "Jed, don't," he warned, his voice low. "That's Apache land now. We have an agreement." Jed laughed, a harsh grating sound. "Agreement? With savages? This is my grazing land, Silas. Always has been, and it always will be." With a deliberate, arrogant motion, he cut a section of the new wire. The taut fence snapped, recoiling with a sharp twang. Then, with a wave of his hand, Jed motioned for his herd to move forward. His cattle, a thick mass of hungry beasts, began to graze into the freshly marked Apache territory, trampling the sparse grass. It was a direct challenge, an open act of defiance, not just to Silas, but to the fragile peace he had worked so hard to establish. Silas felt a surge of cold fury, knowing this wasn't just about cattle or land anymore. It was about respect, about honor, and about a line that had just been crossed in the most blatant way possible. Silas felt a cold dread mix with his anger as Jed's cattle pushed further onto the land. Jed watched him, a smirk on his face, enjoying Silas's helplessness. "What are you going to do, Silas? Cry to your Indian friends?" he taunted, his voice loud enough for his men to hear. Jed's men, encouraged by their boss's bravado, started to prod the cattle deeper into the territory, their horses kicking up dust. The animals chewed at the sparse grass, their heavy hooves crushing the earth. It was a calculated insult, a deliberate act of disrespect meant to provoke a fight. Silas stepped forward, his hands clenching into fists. "Jed, you need to turn your cattle back. This isn't just my land you're disrespecting. This is Apache land." Jed scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "Apache land? There's no such thing. These redskins don't own anything. They just wander around. This is good grazing land, and I'm taking it. What are you going to do about it? Call your little Indian princess?" He laughed, and his men joined in, a chorus of crude jeers. Just as Silas was about to respond, a small figure appeared on the horizon. It was Luna, silhouetted against the vibrant oranges and purples of the setting sun. She walked with a calm, deliberate pace, her small frame radiating a quiet determination that was almost unsettling. She wasn't running, she wasn't shouting. She just walked, a tiny dot growing steadily larger. Jed and his men, caught up in their mockery, didn't notice her at first. Silas's eyes, however, were fixed on her, a mixture of surprise and a strange sense of hope washing over him. He knew this was not going to be good. Luna kept walking until she was just a few yards from Jed, her presence a stark contrast to the boisterous rancher and his men. The noise slowly died down as Jed's men finally noticed her. Jed himself stopped mid-sentence, his laugh catching in his throat. Luna's gaze was fixed on Jed, unwavering, holding a depth that seemed far too old for her young face. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was barely a whisper. Yet it carried across the plains with an eerie clarity, cutting through the tension like a knife. "Don't cross the line." Jed, who had been about to make another crude joke, froze. His eyes, usually full of bluster, flickered with something akin to unease. He looked at the small girl, then back at Silas, then at his men. The quiet strength in Luna's voice, the sheer conviction behind her words, was palpable. It wasn't a threat in the way Jed understood threats. It was a statement of absolute truth, a boundary drawn with more than just wire. He saw not just a child standing there, but the weight of generations, the history of her people, and an unspoken power that he hadn't encountered before. The setting sun cast long, dramatic shadows, making her seem taller, more formidable. Silas, watching the scene unfold, felt a chill run down his spine. He realized, in that moment, the true power of Luna's warning. It wasn't just words. It was an echo of something ancient, something sacred. Jed's face, which was usually ruddy and confident, went stark white. The color drained from it, leaving him looking suddenly vulnerable, almost afraid. The silence that followed Luna's whisper was heavy, broken only by the lowing of the cattle and the distant cry of a hawk. Jed's men shifted uncomfortably, sensing the change in their leader. They looked from Luna to Jed, then back again, their usual bravado replaced by a palpable apprehension. The air crackled with an unspoken tension, and everyone present understood that something profound had just happened. This was no longer just a dispute over land. It was a confrontation with something far older and more powerful. Jed, unnerved by Luna's unwavering eyes and the sudden silent appearance of Apache warriors on the ridge, ordered his men to retreat. The color had not fully returned to his face, and his voice, though still trying to project authority, had a tremor that was impossible to hide. He barked at his cowboys, telling them to turn the herd around, to get them off the land. His men, who had been so quick to follow his lead just moments before, now moved with a new urgency, their eyes darting nervously towards the distant figures on the ridge. These were not the usual cowboys they faced in barroom brawls. These were Apache warriors, and their presence, though silent, spoke volumes. Jed tried to save face, yelling threats at Silas, his words hollow and without conviction. "This isn't over, Silas. You mark my words. You won't get away with this." But the fight had gone out of him. The bluster was gone, replaced by a desperate attempt to regain some semblance of control over a situation that had clearly spun out of his grasp. The unspoken threat from Luna and her people was clear, a boundary drawn not just by a whisper, but by the weight of an entire tribe's resolve. The cattle, which had been grazing contentedly on the forbidden land, were turned back, their hooves kicking up dust as Jed's men herded them away. Jed himself mounted his horse, casting one last resentful glare at Silas and Luna, before spurring his animal into a gallop, his men following close behind. They rode away, defeated not by bullets or a physical confrontation, but by a quiet warning and the undeniable force of conviction that emanated from the small Apache girl and her people. Silas stood beside Luna, watching Jed and his men disappear into the twilight. A silent acknowledgement passed between them, a shared understanding that transcended words. He looked down at the girl, her face still serene, her eyes still holding that ancient wisdom. He felt a profound sense of gratitude and something more, a deep respect for her courage and the power of her people. The new fence line held, not just with the wire he had painstakingly strung, but with the invisible, yet far stronger, threads of respect and a newly forged peace. Days turned into weeks, then months. The new boundary, once a point of contention, became a recognized border, respected by all. The incident with Jed had served as a stark reminder to everyone in the valley that there were lines that should not be crossed, physical and otherwise. Silas found a new understanding with his Apache neighbors, a fragile peace built on mutual respect and, surprisingly, initiated by a young girl's courage. He often saw Luna, sometimes with her family, sometimes alone, watching his ranch from the distant hills. Her presence was no longer a sign of warning, but of quiet observation, a guardian of the peace she had helped establish. Star's death, once a source of fury and a catalyst for the entire series of events, became a bitter lesson, a harsh reminder that some lines existed long before any fence was built. It was a painful education, but one that Silas had desperately needed. He learned that true strength wasn't just about holding ground or asserting dominance, but knowing when to yield, when to listen to voices that had been ignored for too long, and when to honor a whisper that carried more weight than any shout. The quiet girl, Luna, had taught him that some lines, once understood and respected, were best left undisturbed for the benefit of everyone. The landscape around his ranch, though physically unchanged in its grand features, felt different now, imbued with a deeper meaning, a history that he had finally begun to understand. The landscape around his ranch, though physically unchanged in its grand features, felt different now, imbued with a deeper meaning, a history that he had finally begun to understand. He found himself looking at the land with new eyes, seeing the subtle undulations and ancient pathways that had been there for generations, long before his fences ever appeared. He started to notice the way the light fell differently on certain ridges, the specific kinds of plants that grew in particular areas, details that had previously been invisible to his rancher's gaze. It was as if Luna had opened a door for him, not just to a different culture but to a deeper connection with the very earth beneath his feet. This transformation was not just internal. The practicalities of running the ranch also shifted. He found himself more often seeking advice from the Apache elders on matters of the land, particularly regarding water sources and grazing patterns during dry spells. They possessed generations of knowledge about the local ecosystem, knowledge that far surpassed anything he'd learned from books or other ranchers. He learned about native grasses that could withstand drought better than the imported varieties he'd been using, and about natural springs that ran deeper than his drilled wells. These collaborations were initially tentative, marked by a cautious respect on both sides, but over time, they blossomed into genuine cooperation. His ranch hands, initially skeptical of these new alliances, slowly began to see the benefits as well, noting improved yields and healthier livestock. Silas even started to learn a few words of the Apache language, simple greetings and phrases of thanks. It was a small gesture, but one that was met with warmth and appreciation by the Apache people. He found a quiet satisfaction in bridging the gap that had separated them for so long. The fear and suspicion that had once defined their interactions slowly dissolved, replaced by something akin to neighborly trust. He would occasionally exchange goods with them, some of his harvested crops for their expertly crafted pottery or woven blankets. These exchanges were more than just trade. They were symbols of a burgeoning friendship, a tangible manifestation of the peace Luna had helped to broker. One day, as Silas was mending a section of the new fence line, he saw Luna approaching. She wasn't on a horse, but walking, her steps light and purposeful. She carried a small bundle wrapped in deerskin. As she drew closer, he noticed a quiet solemnity in her expression. She stopped a few feet from him, her gaze meeting his with that familiar, unwavering intensity. She unwrapped the bundle to reveal a small, intricately carved wooden horse, a Mustang, its mane flowing, its eyes etched with spirit. "For Star," she said, her voice soft but clear. "And for the new path." Silas took the carving, his fingers tracing the smooth, cool wood. It was a beautiful piece, clearly made with care. He felt a lump form in his throat. It was a gesture of profound reconciliation, a final acknowledgement of the life that had been lost, and a hopeful symbol for the future. Star's death, which had once been a raw wound, now felt like a scar that had healed, leaving behind a reminder of a powerful lesson learned. He looked at Luna, a young girl who had, through her quiet strength and unwavering conviction, reshaped his world and redefined his understanding of justice and coexistence. The carved Mustang in his hand felt heavier than its small size suggested, carrying the weight of a shared history and the promise of a peaceful future. It was a testament to the fact that true strength wasn't just about holding ground, but knowing when to yield, when to listen, and when to honor a whisper that carried more weight than any shout. The quiet girl had taught him that some lines, once understood, were best left undisturbed. Days turned into weeks, then months, and the new boundary became a recognized border, not just a line of wire and posts, but a universally understood agreement. Silas found a new understanding with his Apache neighbors, a fragile peace built slowly, carefully, on mutual respect, a peace initiated by a young girl's courage and conviction. He often saw Luna, sometimes with her family, sometimes alone, watching his ranch from the distant hills. Her presence was no longer a sign of impending conflict, but a quiet affirmation of the peace they had forged. Star's death, once a searing source of fury and resentment for Silas, transformed over time into a bitter yet invaluable lesson. It became a harsh reminder that some lines existed long before any fence was ever built, lines etched into the land and the history of its people. These were lines of heritage, of spirituality, of an ancient way of life that demanded recognition, not obliteration. Silas learned that true strength wasn't just about holding ground, stubbornly defending what he perceived as his, but knowing when to yield, when to listen with an open mind, and when to honor a whisper that carried more weight than any shouted command or threat. The quiet girl, Luna, had taught him more about living in harmony with the land and its original inhabitants than all his years of ranching combined. Her wisdom, expressed through direct action and unwavering gaze, had reshaped his entire perspective. He understood now that the land wasn't just property to be exploited or fenced off. It was a living entity, imbued with meaning and history that transcended simple ownership. The Apache people, through Luna, had shown him a different way to coexist, a way that valued respect over dominance. The carved wooden Mustang, a gift from Luna, sat prominently on Silas's mantelpiece. It was a constant, tangible reminder of the pivotal moment that had changed his life. Every time his gaze fell upon it, he was reminded of Star, of the initial shock and anger, but also of the profound transformation that followed. The Mustang symbolized freedom, wildness, and the unbreakable spirit of the land. It also represented the bridge built between two vastly different cultures, a bridge that had been forged through understanding and a shared desire for peace. Silas continued to work his ranch, but with a renewed sense of purpose and a deeper connection to the environment around him. He adopted some of the Apache methods for land management, rotating his cattle more thoughtfully, allowing native grasses to flourish, and respecting the natural cycles of the seasons. His ranch, once a symbol of encroachment, slowly began to integrate more harmoniously with the surrounding landscape. The prosperity he sought no longer came at the expense of others, but through a collaborative effort, a shared stewardship of the land. The relationship with the Apache community deepened. What started as cautious exchanges of knowledge evolved into genuine friendships. Children from both sides, initially wary, began to play together near the new respected boundary line. Laughter, once rare and strained between the two groups, now echoed freely across the plains. Silas often found himself reflecting on how close he had come to making an irreversible mistake, to escalating a conflict that would have cost far more than a single horse. He realized that sometimes the most powerful actions aren't grand gestures of defiance, but quiet acts of understanding and concession. The quiet girl, Luna, had taught him that some lines, once understood and respected, were best left undisturbed. These lines were not just physical markers on the ground, but invisible boundaries of culture, tradition, and belief. By honoring them, Silas had not only secured peace for his ranch, but had also found a deeper, more meaningful connection to the land and the people who shared it with him. His life, once defined by the relentless pursuit of expansion and control, had found a new, richer definition through humility and respect. The echo of Luna's whisper, "Don't cross the line," remained a guiding principle, a gentle reminder of the delicate balance that sustained both his world and theirs.